My mother asked me to leave in the middle of a holiday meal, her voice low and steady, as if she were requesting salt instead of cutting me loose. There was no argument beforehand, no raised voice, no warning. One moment I was listening to my aunt talk about traffic, the next my mother leaned slightly toward me and said, "You should go. You depend on this family too much." The words landed softly, but they froze the room. Forks paused, someone cleared their throat. No one defended me, not my father, not my brothers. I looked around the table and realized that silence wasn't confusion, it was consent. I didn't feel angry. I felt something cleaner than that. A kind of internal click, like a lock finally turning. Because if they truly believed I depended on them, then they had misunderstood our entire relationship. And misunderstandings like that always come with consequences. I stayed seated for a moment longer, letting the warm lights above the dining table wash over me. They reminded me of childhood dinners before I understood how carefully appearances were maintained in our house. From the outside, we looked ideal. Laughter at the right moments, traditional meals, conversations that sounded affectionate if you didn't listen too closely. But growing up inside that home teaches you to hear what isn't said. My name is Elena Moore. I'm 41 years old. And for most of my life, I believed that if I worked hard enough and gave generously enough, I'd eventually earn a place in my family that didn't feel temporary. At work, I lead teams and manage budgets. At home, I was always the capable one, the daughter who didn't need help, the sister who could handle things, the one everyone leaned on without acknowledging the weight. My mother, Diane, controlled the emotional climate of the family. When she was warm, everyone relaxed. When she turned cold, no one challenged her. That afternoon, she was ice. My father, Robert, stared down at his plate, pushing food around like it might shield him from involvement. My older brother, Mark, suddenly found his phone fascinating, even though the screen was dark. My younger brother, Evan, smirked faintly into his glass, the expression of someone watching something he'd waited years to see. What none of them acknowledged was how much of their comfort rested quietly on me. When Mark needed help during a legal mess years ago, he called me. When Evan struggled with tuition for his daughter, I paid without discussion. When my parents' expenses grew heavier than their income, I handled them quietly, month after month. I never announced it. I never asked for gratitude. I told myself this was what family did for each other. What I didn't admit was that I was paying for belonging installments of loyalty toward a seat that was never fully mine. My mother used to say, "Strong women hold families together." What she never said was that she meant one woman. Me. My brothers were never taught responsibility. They were taught expectation. As I sat there listening to Diane repeat her words, "stop depending on the family," I realized how upside down the logic was. I took a slow drink of water, the taste oddly metallic, and listened as conversation restarted in awkward bursts, everyone eager to pretend nothing had happened, but something had. Something irreversible. Diane chatted about the food, the neighbors, anything but me. Erasure was her favorite method, cleaner than conflict. Eventually, Mark muttered that maybe she was right, that I'd been distant lately. Evan added that there was no shame in needing help, his tone falsely generous. That was when I understood they didn't see my contributions as sacrifice. They saw them as obligation. I excused myself calmly, not to hide, just to breathe. In the bathroom mirror, I didn't see a tired woman or a defeated one. I saw someone who finally understood the rules of the game she'd been playing for decades without knowing it. When I returned, no one noticed. I picked up my coat. Diane looked at me with irritation rather than concern and asked where I was going. "Home," I said, meeting her eyes steadily. For a brief second, something flickered across her face, uncertainty, maybe fear before it vanished. No one stopped me as I walked out. The cold air outside felt sharper, cleaner, more honest than the warmth I'd left behind. I didn't look back. By the time I reached my apartment, the numbness had faded into resolve. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop, canceled payments I'd quietly maintained for years, and closed accounts that were never mine to carry. They had told me to stop relying on the family. So I did, literally, completely, and without drama. That night wasn't the end of my family role. It was the end of my silence. 3 days passed before anyone from my family contacted me, and when they did, it wasn't concern that reached for me first, it was inconvenience. My phone lit up with Evan's name late in the afternoon. I let it ring long enough to register the shift in balance before answering. He didn't bother with a greeting. "What did you do?" he demanded. His voice wasn't worried. It was offended. He explained that the heating at the lake house wasn't working, that the internet was down, that his daughter's weekend plans were ruined. He spoke as if systems failed on their own, as if money appeared by habit rather than intention. I listened without interrupting. When he finally paused for breath, I said evenly, "I stopped paying for things I don't use." The silence on the other end was heavy, confused, almost insulted. He accused me of being dramatic, of abandoning family. I reminded him calmly that I'd been told to stop depending on them. Then I ended the call. Not out of anger, out of accuracy. The messages that followed came in waves. My father left a voicemail asking if we could talk like adults, his tone carefully neutral. As though adulthood hadn't been something I'd carried alone for decades. My mother didn't call at all. That absence spoke louder than any confrontation. 2 days later, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox, official and deliberate. Inside were legal documents filed by my mother, requesting a review of the ownership arrangement for the lake house. She claimed emotional pressure, confusion, misunderstanding. She wanted the property returned to her and my father. I sat at my kitchen counter reading the pages, feeling not betrayed, but clarified. They hadn't tried to talk to me. They had tried to take something back the moment my support disappeared. That was the line, not blurred. Not emotional, clear. I contacted my attorney that same afternoon. He reviewed the paperwork quietly, then smiled in a way that wasn't amused but assured. "They've made a mistake," he said. Years earlier, when I'd helped purchase the property, he'd insisted on a reversion clause, something I'd agreed to without much thought. The clause stated that if the agreement was contested or altered without my consent, full ownership would automatically return to me. By filing the petition, my parents had triggered it themselves. There would be no long fight, no dramatic court date. Legally, the property was already mine again. When he suggested we meet as a group to settle things civilly, I chose a public place, a small diner near the neighborhood where we'd all grown up. Neutral ground, familiar, contained. They arrived together, as they always did when presenting a united front. My mother, Diane, was rigid with restrained anger. My father looked smaller somehow, folded inward. Mark avoided eye contact. Evan looked openly irritated. They slid into the booth across from me like people expecting explanation, not accountability. Diane spoke first. She said I'd made my point, that things had gone far enough. I told her I hadn't filed anything that she had. Her irritation sharpened. She accused me of cutting them off without warning. I told her I hadn't cut them off. I had simply stopped carrying what wasn't mine to hold. Then I placed a folder on the table, not legal threats records. Years of payments, utilities, tuition, repairs, medical bills. Quiet support documented line by line. The table went silent as they flipped through pages they'd never bothered to imagine existed. Mark finally spoke, stunned. "You paid all of this?" I nodded. Evan tried to laugh it off, said no one had forced me. That was when I corrected him. "You didn't ask," I said. "You expected." I slid one final document forward, the clause. I explained what it meant, simply and without heat. The moment they tried to reclaim the property, it returned to me. My mother's expression emptied, not anger, not grief, fear. She had miscalculated and she knew it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I just told the truth. "You said I relied on this family," I said. "But you relied on me. And now you'll have to rely on yourselves." I stood, smoothing my coat. From my wallet, I placed a single $1 on the table, symbolic, final. "This is all that's left," I said quietly. "Everything else I already gave." No one stopped me when I walked away. Outside, the air felt cold and steady. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt trailing behind me. I felt balance. What I had done wasn't revenge. It was correction. And it was long overdue. The days after the diner meeting were quieter than I expected. Not empty, just still. The kind of stillness that comes after a long noise finally stops. No more late-night calls. No urgent messages framed as emergencies. My phone remained on the counter, untouched, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to break. My lawyer confirmed everything in writing. The lake house was legally mine again, no dispute pending, no appeal likely to succeed. He asked if I wanted to pursue compensation or formal repayment. I told him no. I wasn't interested in extracting anything more from people who had already taken so much without noticing. Justice didn't need to be loud to be complete. A week later, my father sent a short email. No explanations, no guilt. Just a simple acknowledgement that they were figuring things out. I read it once and didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because the conversation he wanted now was one I had already finished having. I began to notice changes in my own routines instead. Mornings felt slower. I woke without bracing myself for someone else's crisis. The apartment felt brighter, as if space had opened where tension used to live. I took longer walks, cooked meals without rushing, let silence exist without filling it. I realized how much of my energy had been spent anticipating needs that were never mine to meet. One afternoon, I drove out to the lake house alone. I hadn't been there in years, not as someone who belonged. The place was quiet, a little worn, but solid. I opened windows, let cold air rush through, and stood in the center of the living room listening to nothing at all. I wasn't reclaiming property. I was reclaiming permission. Permission to exist without proving my worth through usefulness. Permission to stop being the dependable background structure in other people's lives. Standing there, I understood something clearly. Boundaries aren't punishments, they're decisions. And I had finally made one. I don't know if my family will ever fully understand what happened. Maybe they'll tell the story differently. Maybe they'll say I changed, that I became cold, that I chose money over people. But I know the truth. I didn't abandon them. I stopped abandoning myself. I gave until giving became invisible, until my presence was only noticed in my absence. Walking away wasn't dramatic. It was necessary. My life is quieter now. Smaller in some ways, but it's also mine. And for the first time, that feels like enough. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about boundaries, family, and finding your own strength.